in these notes, we are going to be putting everything that we know about plants together. So for these notes, we're going to be talking about plant processes. Okay, the first process that I want to talk about is photosynthesis. And I'm going to make all my processes colored red. So if you've got a colored pencil, go ahead and shade your box here. Doesn't have to be perfect. But our photosynthesis, we're going to make that red. Okay, now in photosynthesis, we have an equation. And the equation reads carbon dioxide plus water turns into glucose plus oxygen. So let's write this using our chemical equation language. So CO2 and H2O are going to turn into C6H12O6 plus O2. And if I was going to balance this, I would have 6 CO2 plus 6 H2O turns into 1, so I leave it blank, C6H12O6, and 6 oxygen. Let's go ahead and color these. Let's do green. So I'm going to make it so that all of my molecules are shaded in green. So I've got my CO2, my H2O, my sugar, or my glucose here, and my oxygen. So those are my molecules. Where do these come from? Well, my CO2 is going to come from the air. Where does water come from in a plant? There is some water in the air, but really they're going to be getting this from the soil. My glucose, where does that end up? Because remember, this side of the equation is what's going in, this side of the equation is what's coming out, but it doesn't have to come out of the plant. In fact, my sugar is going to be stored in the plant. And oftentimes this is stored in the roots. So when you get something that has really thick roots, like a tuber, so like potatoes, or when you have carrots, those roots are storing that glucose. They're storing it as starch, which is why potatoes are pretty starchy. But remember that starch is just a bunch of glucose molecules stuck together. And then what's going to happen to my oxygen is my oxygen is going to be released into the air. So that oxygen is going back into the environment. All right, we also have a chemical equation for this, and the chemical equation for this is that we have light energy and that light energy is being converted into chemical energy. And we've always colored our energy yellow, so I'm going to do that here. So this light energy is being converted into chemical energy. And where does that light energy come from? Well, it comes from the sun. So light energy from the sun. And it ends up as chemical energy. Where is that chemical energy? It has to be inside of some molecules, and it's in the molecule glucose. So it's in the high energy bonds in glucose. So this is a way of storing energy. You take the energy from the sun and you store it in those high energy bonds of glucose. So over on the side here, I'm going to give us a little bit more information. I'm going to say that this process occurs when the plant needs to store energy. So the purpose of this is that it stores energy. Which is kind of another way of saying that it makes food or glucose. So these are the purposes of this process, and I'm going to shade this one in orange. So stores energy, makes food, also known as glucose. And then I'm going to make a key at the top to show me what all of this is. So over here, I'm going to say that I've got some things that I'm showing. I'm showing the purpose, which goes along with the process. I'm showing the molecules, and I'm showing the energy. And all of these have some different colors. So my purpose, I've shaded in orange. My process, I've shaded in red. My molecules, I shaded in green. And the energy, I shaded in yellow. And that's going to be helpful as you're going through. If you want to know what the process is, I'm looking for the things in red. If I want to know energy, I'm going to look at the things in yellow. All right, let's move on to our next process. So the next thing that plants can do is they can do biosynthesis. And biosynthesis is another process. So I'm going to color it in red. And in biosynthesis, we're going to start with our glucose. So I'm going to skip 2 lines here so that I have some extra space to write. So I've got my glucose. And glucose is going to go in as, it's our starting point, but it can be turned into other things. So glucose can be turned into any of our monomers. So glucose can be turned into a fatty acid in glycerol. Or glucose can be turned into amino acids. or it can be as itself sugar or more complex sugars like starches. So glucose can turn into any of these things. And then in biosynthesis, we know that these monomers get converted into polymers. So what polymer am I going to make if I add fatty acids to glycerol? Is I'm going to get those fats slash lipids. Remember, that's just another name for it. If I link together a bunch of amino acids, it's because I'm making the polymer protein. And if I link together a bunch of sugars, I'm going to get starches or carbohydrates. So I'm going to make this a little bit clearer by putting a box around this to show that these things are my monomers, and they're getting turned into my polymers. So this one becomes this. Amino acids become protein. Sugars become carbohydrates. But where does the plant get this glucose? Well, it gets this glucose from photosynthesis. And let's add that. This is going to be from photosynthesis. Now this is my chemical equation. So I made all of my molecules before I made them green. So grab that green colored pencil. And shade all of our molecules for our chemical equation green. So if I'm talking about molecules, I'm talking about atoms, which means I'm talking about matter. So if I'm talking about matter, I'm talking about this equation. If I'm talking about energy, well, what's going to happen with this is I've got chemical energy in glucose. It's still chemical energy in my monomers and chemical energy in my polymers. So this doesn't actually change the energy. It just stores the energy. And when it does that, it makes our biomolecules in order to build cells. So if you remember from first semester, our monomers turn into polymers, and then our cells are actually made of our lipids, our proteins, and our carbohydrates. Those are really, really important part of our cells. So the thing here is that this is going to store energy. So that's happening with my energy. And why would the cell want to do biosynthesis? What's the purpose of this process? Well, the purpose is for growth. If your plant needs to grow, or if it needs to make more of itself, because say maybe its leaf got damaged, then it's going to need to do biosynthesis in order to grow. All right, one more process, and then we're going to be done. So the last process is cellular respiration. And I don't want you to forget about cellular respiration just because it's last. a lot of times people think of plants and they think, oh, well, plants do photosynthesis. It's really important. Plants are also doing cellular respiration. So this is a process that all living things do. All living things need energy, and they're going to do cellular respiration in order to get that energy. So our plants and our animals, our fungi, they're doing that cellular respiration. All right, so chemical equation. What goes in? What goes out? First of all, cellular respiration takes glucose or monomers, but we're just going to keep it with the simple form of glucose. And we're going to add oxygen to make carbon dioxide and water. So glucose plus oxygen turns into carbon dioxide and water. The chemical equation for this is going to be C6H12O6 plus O2 turns into CO2 plus H2O. And if I wanted to balance this, I would need 6 oxygen for 6 carbon dioxide and 6 water. And remember, it only takes 1 of those glucose. So get your green colored pencil. These are my molecules. So I've got glucose, oxygen, carbon dioxide, and water. Those are molecules. So this is talking about the change in matter. Let's talk about where these things come from. So the glucose, where does a plant get glucose from? Well, it gets it from photosynthesis. It gets oxygen. Ooh, we're going to make this one kind of go over here. From the air. It gets carbon dioxide. Sorry, it doesn't get it. It releases it because this is what's coming out of the equation. So it releases it into the air. And then water is going to come out of the plant as well. And the water actually comes out through the leaves. It's this process called I can't think of the name of it right now. It's the process where the water comes in through the roots and it goes out through the leaves. I think it's called, it starts with a T. But what's happening is the water is coming out and it's going into the air. So both carbon dioxide and water are going into the air. It's sort of like breathing out, where we breathe out carbon dioxide and water into the air. Well, the plants kind of breathe it out as well. Last but not least on here, we need to talk about energy. We've talked about changing matter. Now we need to talk about changing energy. Our energy is in the glucose, so it's chemical energy. And that chemical energy is going to be transformed into kinetic energy. And this energy change is yellow. Transpiration, that's what the name of the water coming out is. And this chemical energy is got to come from somewhere. Energy can't just be created or destroyed. So this chemical energy is from high energy bonds in glucose. And the kinetic energy is going to be released as heat. And motion. All right, last thing on here. What is the purpose of this? Well, the purpose of this is everything needs energy, and this is going to release energy. So the energy was stored, and now it can be released so that it's usable by our plant. And there we go, plant processes. There are 3 processes: cellular respiration, biosynthesis, and photosynthesis.